Howdy folks, Doc here with Last Best Tool, and let's look at snap-on wrenches and variations on a theme. This is the standard combination wrench. You've got a 12-point box end on one end and then the open end on the other. Everybody should have a set of these or two. They're great. There's no substitute really, although we are using sockets a lot more. But as far as a universal design that's stood the test of time, definitely this. But there are a lot of variations of these things. So let's take a look at a few of them. Well, here's one. This is, these are both 19s, 19 millimeter, so it's identical heads and identical tails, but the middle is missing on this stubby. And stubbies are great for real low clearance areas, where there's not much room to get a wrench in or to move the wrench. A lot of times we might use a ratchet, of course, instead, but for a lot of things, sometimes even holding bolts, these stubbies are great. Another variation, throw a ratchet on the end of it. I would recommend, a set like this, these ratchet end wrenches as the next upgrade after these. The rest of these have really specific applications, and I'd love to know what you use them for if you've got them, simply because not that many people have very many of them, so finding out what they're good for can be a little tough. And usually you ask around, people say, well, I managed to do it a different way, so I don't need that. Well, Snap-on obviously makes things like this, but they don't really tell you what they're for. But anyway, so adding a ratchet end, there are a couple of variations here. You can get a straight one. If you get the straight one, you just flip it over to reverse, or if there's any bend, like the standard 15-degree offset, then you do need a reversing switch to have the ability to go back and forth or on and off. Another variation might be the dual box end. These are really handy. I find them great for grabbing and holding, say, a bolt or a nut when you're working on the other side. Very easy to slip on. You don't have to see what's going on. You just get it centered. They come in dual sizes with a little bit of an offset, both off the beam and a tilt, so they fit nicely. Don't smash your knuckles usually. And these feel fairly short. I don't know if they make longer ones quite like this, but I really like these, especially for the size work that I do. Variation on this theme would be something like this, where you've got a really long wrench. Again, this is a 12 and 14. There's a 13 and 14. This one is flat. They call these high performance wrenches, Snap-on does, and I think probably the reason is because they're a low torque wrench. They aren't designed for applying a huge amount of force, but they do have the ability to stay on nice and snugly because of that angle, if there's clearance, and the ability to reach into areas that you might not be able to get a traditional wrench, if your hand has to go in the space along with it. A variation on that theme is adding, the dual ratcheting end. Snap-on makes sets of these. I just bought the one that I needed, the 12 and 14. I'll probably get an 8 and a 12 when it's available. I've had one on order since probably since I was in high school, but it hasn't come in yet. And this, because they're flat, you can just flip it around in order to reverse direction. But these are super handy. A lot of people have Mountain wrenches, the Mountain brand. They're great wrenches as well. Very similar. They use a 12-point, or actually those use a spline drive. And the ability to get into areas with this much leverage, can be very handy. Speaking of large sizes, here's a 30-32. If you have double open ends like these, here's a 30-32, here's a 14-15. I mean, you're getting twice the number of spots, the number of sizes on one wrench, so those can be quite handy as well. No box ends, but you do get that performance of in this case a 14 and a 15, so you can get a whole set of wrenches in a small space if you're trying to save space or weight. There's a variation on that, which is called a four-way wrench, which is double-sided. Looks very similar. However, they're both the same size, and there is a greater offset. So if you turn here, and turn there, 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 all four directions, you can actually get, probably in a confined space, you can actually get enough rotation to spin a bolt or a nut simply by moving it as far as you can, and flipping it over, moving it a little bit more, flipping it over, flipping it long ways, move it, try to get a hold of it, and then again, or some combination of the above. So that's what those are good for. Obviously, the kind of flare nut wrenches, they're designed to grab, like brake line flare nuts and not slip off or damage the bolts. But you can't use them on things where you need to be able to slide the nut on it. So it's very similar to a box end, except this will fit over, say like a brake line or something, and then grab the fastener, whereas you can't get these over it, and then these might not grab it well enough that you end up ruining the fastener. Here's another variation. Standard, double-sided, except it's very thin. So if you compare this to the traditional wrenches, you can see it's a lot thinner. Again, very low torque environment. This I-13-15, I use this in bikes. In fact, sometimes the pedals, they're generally 15 millimeter flats on the inside of the pedal spindle, and that's where these can come in handy. It's not a real high torque application. It shouldn't be anyway, unless it's seized or something. But some of them have hex heads on the insides to run like a 6 millimeter or 8 millimeter. These, this is usually my go-to. But it's the real thin profile wrenches is another variation. This is called a half moon wrench. It's basically for reaching around something where there's really no other way. Some people have manufactured their own. Snap-on sells these. They're not cheap, and they're very specific, sometimes for batteries, sometimes for certain engine components where there's really no way to get around except by having a bent wrench. Kind of does some magical turn. And of course they're very low leverage, just simply because of the shape. Another variation on that one is the kind of the S wrench. Got kind of an S shape here. Again, kind of the same. You get I think a little bit better leverage with this because it's got somewhat of a standard handle, or the ability to grab something here on the end. This one here, I just looked it up. Let me double check. This S shape one is about $62. So Snap-on asks a premium for their odd shaped wrenches. But not that many people use them, and of course even fewer have them. Or say that the other way, not that many people have them, and even fewer probably use them. I found a couple of uses for them. I was more curious, but that's an interesting wrench shape, and it's been around for a long time, so there's got to be something out there. Let me know in the comments if you use these, and if you do, what size, because they do sell these in sets, and I can imagine it might be helpful for somebody who is not sure what they're going to run into, and is trying to cover all contingencies. But for me, 10 and 12, I mean, that's what I would run into. So anyway, those are variations on a theme. We got longer, we got ratcheting, we got thick, we got multiple sides. But, when it's time to move beyond the traditional combination wrench, lots of different directions. And I'm curious what you use. What other directions are there? I stuck with Snap-on here. There are variations I've got in other wrench companies. But, for this particular video, Snap-on kind of was the limiting factor here for me. Anyway, let me know what you use, what you've got. And with that, Doc out.